Fidelis, we're very happy to be with you today. We today are going to talk about the pro-life world. Cassie and I both work in the pro-life world, and so this is a topic that's very near and dear to our hearts. Obviously, this is kind of like the big week for pro-lifers. Last Friday was the March for Life, and Monday was the 45th anniversary of the Supreme Court's Roe v. Wade decision, which legalized abortion on demand for any reason. And then what a lot of people don't know, that on the same day that Roe v. Wade was handed down, a case called Doe v. Bolton came down the same day. And that case said that abortion was legal through all 9 months of pregnancy. So America today is one of only 7 nations in the world that allows abortion basically after the second trimester. Most places cut it off, I think, like around halfway through the pregnancy. From what I understand, like most of Europe, you can't get an abortion after the first trimester. So yeah, our laws are pretty draconian. And I think we're in the company of countries like Vietnam, North Korea, Communist China, Canada. We know Canada's a little crazy with politics. The Netherlands, and what are the other countries, Cassie?
I actually don't know all 7. I know, like you said, China, North Korea, Canada. Yeah, most of Europe has really, 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 really strict laws on abortion. Yeah. Like not only is it outlawed after 12 weeks in most European countries. There are a few, like the United Kingdom, they'll allow it after 20, or up to 20, I should say, 24 weeks. But most of them, no abortion after 12 weeks. They have waiting periods and parental restrictions, like all kinds of, restrictions on abortion. So even beyond just the 9 months of pregnancy that abortion is legal in the United States, the fact that our abortion facilities go basically unregulated and uninspected.
Right.
We have, it varies state by state, but a lot of places there are no federal requirements as far as restrictions on abortion.
Right. Yeah, and actually there's federal requirements restricting what states can do to restrict abortion. So like Planned Parenthood versus Casey, the Supreme Court in the early 90s, put restrictions on how at what point in pregnancy states can restrict abortion and for what reasons. So that created a dangerous precedent that really took away a lot of the liberty that individual states should have to do the will of the people and regulate abortion on a state-by-state basis. So the pro-life movement has done a lot of good over the last 45 years. More abortion facilities closed last year than I think ever before. Most of the regulations that the pro-life movement has passed in terms of legislation over the last 45 years have happened in the last few years. So we've got really strong momentum right now, but we still do have a lot of work to do, because even if we have a miracle and Roe v. Wade is overturned, there's still going to be a lot of culture change that needs to happen before abortion will really cease to happen in the U.S. So Cassie and I wanted to have a conversation this week to honor the anniversary of Roe v. Wade, just talk about what happened at the March for Life, what it is, and then dive into some current news related to the pro-life movement. A lot of people probably heard yesterday that Cecile Richards will be stepping down from the helm of Planned Parenthood. And then Catholics for Choice has been getting very vocal this season, more than usual. So at least they've been coming up in my news feed more than usual. So we'll probably talk a little bit about them as well. They're basically Satan. We'll talk about it. Yeah. So Cassie, did you go to the March for Life that's near you?
No, I actually didn't. I can't remember why I didn't, but there was some reason.
Oh yeah, always with kids.
Yeah, they do have it. They have one. It's in St. Augustine, and I really want to go one year, and I'm hoping that maybe next year will be that year. But they start at the shrine. It's the Mission of Nombre de Dios and the Shrine of Our Lady of La Leche, which they call it America's most sacred acre because it's where the first mass ever in the United States was held, and it's where the Spanish originally landed, and the shrine of Our Lady of La Leche and the Good Delivery, Our Lady of the Milk and Happy Delivery. It's a very, I mean, it makes sense to start there. And they walk through St. Augustine up to the square where the Cathedral Basilica is, and then there's speakers and stuff. And so one time I will get there eventually.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting that it's kind of got a religious theme in Florida, and that makes sense because of the history of St. Augustine. Here in Texas, it's more of a not political, but more of an activist demonstration. So it's more like the March for Life in DC, I would say. So they march from about, I think it's like a mile away from the state capitol in Austin. And Austin is like the San Francisco of Texas. So it's the city where you're most likely to face opposition for being pro-life. I know in Houston, people are very pro-life, and I get very little backlash for my pro-life bumper stickers or anything. There's just a couple of times people have like honked or given me the finger or something, but for the most part, people are very accepting here. It's just a very diverse city. But if you go to Austin, you will get people that are upset that you're there marching for life. So yeah, some of the marches around the US haven't happened yet. So some of them were last week. I think Texas is going to be this Saturday if you're in Texas and can get to Austin. The West Coast March for Life is maybe tomorrow or Saturday in California. So there's still some options if you're interested in doing that type of thing. You just show up, and you can bring a sign if you want, or someone will be passing out signs, and just march with your fellow pro-lifers. It's a good experience, and it kind of makes you feel like less of an anomaly, especially if you live in an area where being pro-life, outspokenly pro-life, is not really welcome.
Well, but you were in the March for Life in DC.
Yes.
Which is the big one. So what was that like?
Well, it's huge, first of all. I mean, every year it's like hundreds of thousands of people. And what I love about it is that the March for Life is walking proof that every stereotype about the pro-life movement is false. So if you walk into the middle of the March for Life, like, you can't take a step without hitting like a high school student. Like, the March for Life is primarily made up of like high school and college students. Most of the March for Life is people under the age of 25 because they are the pro-life generation. They're not there because their parents dragged them. Quite to the contrary, a lot of them are there because they had to work extra jobs and save up their pennies to buy a plane ticket or a bus fare. They're sleeping on the floors of churches because they're students, and they come usually in groups, sometimes alone or just with one person, but it's young people that worked really hard to be able to make the trip, sacrifice the time away from classes. A lot of people will have to be playing catch up and really double timing it to catch up with school and college and high school when they get home. So people make sacrifices to go. It's a lot of young people. It's very religious as well, in terms of there's a lot of church groups that come, especially Catholic church groups. So the March for Life is kind of a reminder that the Catholic Church really did pioneer the pro-life movement. And now it's an extremely diverse movement. And it's very beautiful to see one group of Catholics praying the rosary in the march next to a group of gay pro-lifers that are atheists. You know, like, everyone just marches together because at the end of the day, everyone that comes there, not because of their religion or because of their political views. They come there because everyone's on the same page that life begins at conception and killing people is wrong. Like that, it's as simple as that. That's what it boils down to. So the march in DC starts with a rally. Usually there's like a musical element, and then to get people fired up. And then there are a number of speakers. So leaders of the pro-life movement, religious leaders. The president live streamed an address to the March for Life, which was a first. President Bush and President Reagan made phone calls, obviously, because live streaming wasn't a thing during their presidencies, but
Right.
President Trump did live stream with Vice President Pence, and then Speaker Ryan was live. Last year, Vice President Pence and Kellyanne Conway actually attended the March for Life rally and spoke live. So it was very cool to see the support from Washington and all the different religious and political groups that come together in spite of whatever differences they have to speak and rally for life. And then once the march starts, I mean, you're just in a throng of hundreds of thousands of people. There was like a marching band from New Orleans that was playing the whole time. It was awesome. People praying the rosary, singing songs, doing chants, and just a very, very, very peaceful demonstration. I saw one little girl, and I say little girl because she literally looked like she was 12, walking through the crowd with a shirt that said, "My body, my choice." I don't know if the shirt was meant to be ironic, but she's genuinely the only person I saw that could have even been construed as a protester. And she wasn't saying anything. She was just walking around. Maybe she was curious. I don't know. She was with a friend that wasn't wearing anything. They weren't holding signs. So I saw her, and I know that there were literally a few other protesters by the Supreme Court. But by the time I got there, because the march is so long that the people at the front get there way ahead of you if you are anywhere in the middle or toward the end. I mean, it just goes on for like 2 hours. But by the time I got there, Students for Life had set up shop in that area, and they had their huge banners up, and any protesters that were there were literally invisible. There were so many pro-life college students in front of the Supreme Court and post-abortive women. So those are the two kind of groups that set up shop once the march is done. It finishes at the Supreme Court. And post-abortive women give their testimonies for like an hour after the march. And then Students for Life stays there and peacefully confronts any protesters that are there, and also just stands as a witness that the pro-life generation is young and thriving and growing. An interesting statistic that came out, well, just math that you can do recently is pro-life student groups outnumber pro-abortion groups on campuses in the US by more than 5 to 1. So Students for Life of America alone, one pro-life organization, has like 1,200 student groups around the country. And Planned Parenthood and NARAL and the Feminist Majority and all of those organizations together only have a handful. They have a couple hundred total around the country, and they're not thriving. They're not making a big difference on campus. So it's just cool. It's just a reminder of how young and vibrant the pro-life movement is. And it's always really reinvigorating to go and kind of get refreshed at the March for Life.
I think that what you mentioned is a good point, because the pro-abortion movement kind of has a tendency to represent the pro-life movement as being, old religious white guys who
Right.
only do it because of their religious beliefs, and it's like white evangelicals and that's it. And it's like, well, those people exist, but that's not what the pro-life movement is today anymore.
Oh, no. Yeah, and I mean, I would like to point out that this is why the media doesn't cover the March for Life, because you cannot cover the March for Life without debunking everything you've ever said about the pro-life movement. It's young, it's diverse, there are multitude of political and religious views, or lack thereof, at the March for Life.
No, it's secular pro-life.
Exactly. I mean, literally, the media would have to pick. Either they're going to cover the March for Life, or they're going to have to start talking about the pro-life, or they can keep talking about the pro-life movement in deceptive terms, but they can't do both because one would refute the other.
Yeah, and there's so many different people and I think that a big part of the reason that there are so many different groups now that identify as pro-life, and why so many of them are young, is because of the medical advancements that we've had. The older people who are more pro-abortion, I don't want to say I excuse it, because there's no reason for them to continue living in their ignorance. But we have to remember, in the 70s and 80s, we didn't have all the information that we have now about the science of fetal development and embryology. And, they didn't know those things in the 70s and 80s. So it's a little bit more understandable that when the abortionist says to you, oh, well, that's just a clump of tissue. It's not a person yet. You know, you believe it.
They didn't know. They really didn't have the evidence to prove that that was false. But you and I grew up with, you know, ultrasound images of our younger brothers and sisters on the refrigerator. We knew their sex before they were born. That wasn't a thing, you know, even shortly before you and I were born. I mean, you and I were born right when people started to be able to find out what the sex was, much less like see an MRI image of a child jumping up and down inside of its mother's womb. So yeah, the science, and I mean, then you have fetal surgery. I mean, you see children reach out of their mother's womb and grab the doctor's hand. And so there's you see how the rhetoric kind of changes as the science progresses, because the argument that it's not a baby just doesn't hold water anymore. And so they're having to get more creative, but our generation is smart enough to know that no matter what philosophical reasoning you put behind killing a baby, they are having to acknowledge that, yes, this is killing a baby. Now the question is it okay to kill a baby or not? You can't argue that it's not a child.
Yeah, and there have actually been people in the pro-abortion movement that started to become their tactic. Like, yes, it's a baby. Yes, this is a human being, but you should be allowed to kill it anyways. And it's like, well, no, that's not really how it works.
Right. Yeah. And that's scary, because if you can kill, if we're acknowledging that it's okay to kill some humans, we will inevitably end up at a might makes rights philosophy, which says that anyone that we're strong enough to kill and who isn't strong enough to defend themselves, those will be free game for this same worldview.
Yeah. And you had even mentioned too, and I mean, it's not, I don't want to say the wrong or get the wrong message across here, because abortion at any gestation is wrong. It doesn't matter if you're only, 4 weeks along. If you just found out and you go and you get the abortion pills the next day, it's still wrong. But like you mentioned with Roe and Doe, how they legalized, abortion pretty much completely, all 9 months of pregnancy. There was a lot of talk over the past week, and you mentioned this on Twitter, and I wrote about this for Live Action. This is not something that most Americans support. Americans overwhelmingly do say that they want abortion to remain legal, which is unfortunate. But the majority of Americans do say they want abortion to be legal, but that's where it stops. So while the abortion movement was sitting here saying, hashtag 7 in 10 for Roe.
False.
Yeah, no, they don't. The majority of Americans, this is consistent for years and years and years and years now. They oppose taxpayer-funded abortion.
Yes.
They oppose abortion after the first trimester.
Right.
They support heavy abortion restrictions.
Right.
They support things like parental consent laws and waiting periods. They support ultrasound, viewing. Yeah. They think that abortion should only be legal in very limited circumstances. So this idea that this is a country of people who are just all fanatical about abortion. Well, that's not really the case. Yeah. Yes, people think it should be legal, but only in very limited circumstances. And, I would admit that a lot of that is because of misinformation anyway.
Yes.
Like take, for example, the idea of, we should have abortion in case it saves the life of the mother. Well, scientifically speaking, that's not a real thing. That's not a thing. You can maybe make that argument in some limited cases in the first trimester, i.e. ectopic pregnancy.
Right.
But that's usually not the context in which it's brought up.
The actual abortion doesn't save the woman's life with an ectopic pregnancy. Removing the fallopian tube is what, the mother and child have to be separated, but the act of killing the child is not what ends up saving her life in that case.
Right. But when people, usually that argument is brought up in the case of, 20-week, like late term abortion being legal. And it's like, we need to have that because what if, a woman needs it to save her life? And it's like, well, that doesn't happen. That's not how it works. And people don't realize that, they see these sob stories and they think, well, that's the way that it I've noticed that like among pro-abortion writers, for example, they'll say, I had severe preeclampsia at 22 weeks. And I had to deliver my baby early. So this is why late-term abortion should be legal. And it's like, well, in a case like that, though, abortion at 22 weeks, it takes days and days. So if we're talking an actual health emergency with the mother, guess what's faster? A C-section.
Right. Yeah, delivering the baby. And just to clarify church teaching for anyone who's not aware, removing the child from the mother when the child's life is in danger because of the pregnancy is never a sin. Directly killing the child is a sin. So in the case of an ectopic pregnancy or severe preeclampsia, you can remove the child knowing that there is a 100% or very great chance that the child will die as a result of that procedure. But you cannot perform a procedure that will directly kill the life of the child, nor is such a procedure ever necessary. So it's always, in every case where a woman's life is in danger from abortion, there is always a way to separate the mother and child without directly causing or directly killing the child, even if that act will cause the child to die as a result.
And the thing is that as medicine advances, babies are able to survive earlier and earlier. And now there's even this talk of artificial wombs, right? I think that's what they're calling them.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that's still probably a long, long way away. And it's funny because the pro-abortion movement, now this is putting them into all kinds of trouble, and they have actually come out against them. I've seen in lots of circumstances where they oppose it.
Science.
Because it's like, oh, well, a woman shouldn't have to decide if, then she's still got the baby out there somewhere. And it's like, she can sign her rights away and the baby can be removed from her body in theory. I mean, this isn't possible now, but, theoretically, when it happens, she can remove the baby, put it in another womb. Some person can adopt that child. She doesn't have to be pregnant anymore. The baby doesn't have to die. You would think this would be a win-win, but nope. No, it's not.
Yeah. And that's what exposes the hypocrisy of the abortion movement. The abortion movement claims to be about the empowerment of women. And yet what they campaign for is the right to kill people. They don't campaign for the rights of women. And psychologically, there's no denying that a child that's intentionally killed by the choice of a mother has bad consequences for women. So you would think if they were really concerned about the well-being of women and women's empowerment, they would be looking for these ways to help women get out of a pregnancy situation they don't want to be in without the child dying. But that's not what they're about. And these the artificial womb story is a perfect example that exposes what they really are about.
And they deny science so much. I mean, not just like
like science. To a point, it's funny.
Yeah. But I mean, not just the science of, like we mentioned, like fetal development. They'll ignore all of that. We know that. But they even ignore, like there was this one study that they touted a lot recently in the past couple of years that they claim shows that, women don't regret their abortions. Well, the only people that they surveyed in this, it wasn't like a peer-reviewed study.
Right.
The only people they surveyed were people who were pro-choice. I don't like saying pro-choice, but, pro-choice, who a lot of them had had abortions before. The people around them supported their choice to have an abortion, and they only followed them for 3 years. So it's like your sample size are people that have a bias.
Right.
If it were some of the people and then some of them were pro-life or some of them were ambivalent, that would be different. It's like all of them were thought positively of abortion. They only followed them for a few years. It wasn't a long-term study. And that is literally the only study to come up with that result.
Right.
And abortion is not good for women. And it's in the scientific literature that says that. Every single other scientific study done on the effects of abortion afterwards psychologically has shown that it has negative consequences. Women who have abortions are at an increased risk of mental health disorders like depression and anxiety. They are more likely to exhibit suicidal behavior. They are more likely to abuse drugs and alcohol, and they are more likely to do self-harm.
Right, exactly. And you have to perform a longitudinal study on a large sample size that is randomly selected. You cannot pick and choose your candidates for a study. It needs to be longitudinal. I mean, part of the problem with the 3-year time cap on that study is that typically women don't realize that any after effects that they exhibited after abortion were associated with the abortion until they can look back in retrospect with a more clear mind. So the study you're talking about, I think they really only followed women for like 6 months. Maybe they did the study for 3 years, but I don't think they even talked to anyone like 3 years after the abortion. But you need more time, and that is the MO, the modus operandi of abortion studies. So there's a group out of Texas, University of Texas, that studies the effects of pro-life laws here in Texas, and they do the same thing. I mean, they surveyed people after HB2 and asked this group of women something like, do you know anyone who has tried to commit an abortion on themselves? In other words, like has gone to Mexico and gotten a drug. And
I remember that one. It was so bogus.
It was a bogus study because it was based on hearsay. So they asked these women, do you know anyone who's ever done this? And
they didn't even ask them when they did it.
What?
They didn't even ask them when they did it. They just said, do you know anyone who's ever done this?
They did. It could have been like 40 years ago. And then they came out and their conclusion was that HB2, a law that had only been in effect for like 6 months at that point, was causing like 60,000 women in Texas to self-abort based on hearsay and no timeline. And that is every single pro-abortion study that you look at, you can point out, if you know anything about the scientific method, why it was flawed.
Yeah, and they didn't ask them where either. So it was like these people, or if they were born in Texas or like anything. So it's like these people, they could have tried to have given themselves an abortion in Mexico, like you mentioned, or Colorado or California or anywhere.
Exactly.
It was ridiculous. I remember that one. That blew my mind that it got so much traction.
I know. And it was cited in like every mainstream paper that HB2 was causing people to die and commit these atrocities to their own bodies based on, I mean, any journalist could have looked at that study and been like, I'm sorry, this is not credible evidence for any story I'm going to write. But they'll just run with propaganda at this point. So, I mean, we always have to be aware that the mainstream media is in bed with the abortion industry and they're working off of propaganda. They are not working off of scientific evidence. And interestingly, when scientific evidence that supports our position does come out, like there was just a study released from I think the largest psychological journal in the country, showing that abortion has severe negative effects on women and that almost 74% of women relay that they were pressured or coerced into their abortion. I haven't seen one mainstream media outlet cover that study, and that is very significant.
And the abortion industry doesn't care about that either. You know, they call themselves pro-choice, but I mean, like I just said, there are so many women that are pressured and coerced into abortions. And that's one of the things that frustrates me sometimes about the pro-life movement. Not everyone, obviously, but there are people that I will see every now and then, like commenters on articles I write on Live Action or something, or on Twitter or whatever. So this isn't like indicative of the entire pro-life movement. There are people that will sit there and will attack women who've had abortions, say that they're murderers and so on, and they're terrible and they're unforgivable. And it's like, well, so many of these women didn't come to this choice on their own. They were pressured and coerced into it. And it's very nice for you to sit there on your, high pedestal and say, oh, well, if my parent at 15 was threatening to kick me out of the house and I was going to be homeless, well, I wouldn't have an abortion. It's like, well, good for you. I'm glad that you're so perfect.
Yeah.
That doesn't help anyone.
No, it doesn't. No, and this is a good seg. I want to take the opportunity to mention the organization that I work for. I'm the public relations manager at an organization called Human Coalition. And the reason that we were created is to reach an unreached population in America, which is about 1.2 million women every year who are actively seeking an abortion. There hasn't been an outreach to that group of women that has been effective up until a few years ago when Human Coalition pioneered search engine marketing. So we are reaching women that are actively seeking an abortion by searching for abortion procurement terms in their area. So they might be searching for something like, where do I get an abortion in Atlanta? Those type of terms, our ads are popping up. They'll contact our contact center. And at that point, we will disclose that we will not provide an abortion, but that if they come in, we can talk to them and see if we can help. So then they'll come into one of our women's care clinics, and those clinics see exclusively women that are actively seeking an abortion. So we're not seeing women who are undecided or planning to carry to term. This is just an outreach for women that are actively seeking an abortion, and that was an unmet need until recently. What we're seeing is that almost all of the clients that we see, we ask them on intake, if your circumstances were different, would you still be seeking an abortion? And they almost all say no. I say yes, if their circumstances were different, they would not be seeking an abortion. And so what we're working to do is identify with every single individual woman, what's the crisis that's driving you to feel that abortion is your only option? Typically, it's a relationship issue or an economic issue. So either they're not being supported by their loved ones or their partner, or they don't feel they have the resources to raise a child. They might be homeless or jobless or in school, whatever the case may be. So we work with them on an individual basis to identify the crisis and then address it. So we'll quarterback services to them from our supporters, local church groups, government agencies, local nonprofits. We'll go with them to the Medicaid office to apply for health care. We'll be with them at their doctor's appointments if they want. And then we have a continuum of care program that will stay with them through the pregnancy and beyond, to whatever level they prefer that we be involved. So they can come back to us when they're pregnant again, or when their kid is 5 years old and they need something else, we're there for them. And so this kind of speaks to another issue that you and I had discussed before the show, and that was that pro-lifers get accused of only caring about the baby, when that's clearly not the case. If you talk to any pro-lifer, you'll know that's not the case. But then there's also organizations like Human Coalition, which explicitly exist to debunk that myth, because our programs are there for people not just during their pregnancy. We're not just there to make sure that they give birth, although abortion is the leading cause of death in America. It's a genocide. 1 million kids are dying a year. So that is our first priority, is making sure the child isn't killed. But beyond that, we're there for women and to build strong families and to make sure that people are thriving, to help. The pro-life movement helps campaign for disability rights. We help to campaign for end-of-life issues. We don't want people to be euthanized. We don't want assisted suicide to be a thing. And that all ties into our Catholic identity and then the pro-life position as a whole.
Right. And I mean, abortion is obviously the leading, problem. Mm-hmm. It's the biggest problem right now, but it's not the only thing that pro-lifers care about. It's about respecting the dignity, inherent dignity of every human person. Like, that's ultimately the meaning of being pro-life. Mm-hmm. So abortion is the biggest threat to that. So that's why that's the biggest, fight. Mm-hmm. But it's not the only thing. And different people will have different goals in mm-hmm. being pro-life. For example, in the news over the past couple of years, people in Catholic circles might have heard about Father Rene Robert. He was a local priest to me who was murdered. And before he was murdered, he had been very active in prison ministry. And so he spoke out a lot about the death penalty. And he actually had written, should I ever be a victim of murder, I do not want my killer to be put to death.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's obviously very moving, like his individual story. But the point there is that Father Rene Robert, the death penalty was a big personal issue for him. And so that's what he advocated for. Me, it's several things. I feel strongly about abortion, so I speak out about that. I have a child with a disability, so I speak out about that. Mm-hmm. It's not a one size fits all, this is how you're pro-life and this is the only way that you can be mm-hmm. issue.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think most pro-lifers acknowledge that we are operating, most of us, off of a worldview that says life is inherently valuable. That translates into a lot of aspects of life. That translates into feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, trying to work against any threat to life, whether that's assisted suicide or capital punishment, where capital punishment is not really justified. But almost all of us are also on the same page that as long as abortion is culturally accepted, every threat to life is going to be harder to combat. So it's kind of like, if we can address this thing that's killing 1 million people every year and it's legal, then we'll have a much firmer ground to stand on to be able to combat these other issues that are killing or influencing fewer people, but are still threats to the dignity of the human person that we as Catholics and pro-lifers value so much.
Right. And we have to be smart about how we take on that fight too. And that was one thing you talked about recently on Twitter. And it's something that, like you mentioned, Human Coalition is doing so well right now. You'd mentioned when we spoke earlier that there's kind of division in the pro-life movement right now. And we're kind of at a crossroads, I feel like, as pro-lifers, because we've been so successful. You know, it's an issue of, well, how do we move forward now? What are the tactics that we should use? Who are the leaders of this movement?
Right.
And we have to make sure that we are thoughtful and careful about how we move forward, because it can really do a lot of good or a lot of damage.
Right. Yeah, the pro-life movement is more diverse right now than ever before. And I think we're facing the beauty of that, at the same time, the challenges that come along with that, because the pro-life movement was founded and does exist on Judeo-Christian principles that say every human is created equal and every human has inherent value because they're made in the image of God. Meanwhile, we've welcomed so many other groups of people into the fold. I mean, there's gay pro-lifers, there's atheist pro-lifers, there are Democrat pro-lifers, and that is wonderful. And we want to work alongside people, anyone who shares the opinion or the conviction that we can't end human lives. Like that's kind of also a given just by human nature. We know that. But we're facing challenges because there are definitely different opinions about how we should go about ending abortion. I mean, one example of many is just like, should we use graphic images, or what type of language should we use? Should we be direct, or should we just be really, really nice and PC? And I personally have an opinion on every single one of those things. But I think that as a pro-life movement, what we're facing now is the challenge and kind of the call to rise up and be able to say that even if I disagree with this other pro-lifer on how we're going to go about doing things, I'm going to recognize that fundamentally we're both working toward the same end game. And I'm going to put aside my pride. I'm going to have the humility and not have the hubris to exert my energy on trying to stop this pro-lifer from doing something that I don't agree with, and just focus on coming together and working toward the end goal. And that might mean just not saying anything, you know, publicly to them that's just going to cause strife. You know, it might just mean biting your tongue. It might mean having a conversation with them in private. It might mean going to an event together. You know, that can mean many different things, but I am a little concerned by the way that some people are putting so much energy into what they view to be the problems with certain groups within the pro-life movement, and not enough energy on just working toward that end game. Because I think that it's a temptation from the devil, basically, to distract us from what we're ultimately trying to achieve. So there's kind of that piece that's going on.
And I think that there is also a problem with some people wanting to be like almost like a pro-life celebrity. And there are a few people that I think this applies to who will remain nameless.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's part of the problem, is that it's not so much about the greater good. I hate using that term now. It always makes me think of like Harry Potter. You know?
Right.
and, Grindelwald, but instead of thinking about the greater good of, what's going to be best for the pro-life movement, for them, it's, about having that fame and notoriety and the spotlight. And, that leads them to do some not great things. And I think that, sometimes the videos that you see, it's like, I'll look at them and I'll think, is this really about you wanting to do what's best for the pro-life movement? Or is this about you grandstanding so you can get, like pats on the back?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that right now. And I mean, that does come back to the diversity that we started to see in the pro-life movement about 10 years ago. We started to have former abortion workers come onto the scene, more atheists, and just people with different views than the maybe older generation of the pro-life movement, which, I mean, I have nothing against either generation of the pro-life movement, but it's more diverse now. And I think what happened is that people came in with good intentions, these kind of like newcomers, if I may. They came in with good intentions, but the spotlight came onto them because they were kind of an anomaly to the pro-life movement. The media was like, oh, let's talk about you because you must have a different opinion, you must have different viewpoints, and what do you not like about the pro-life movement that you're doing it differently? And that went to some people's heads. I mean, very clearly it went to some people's heads to the point that you have op-eds now where pro-life, quote unquote, pro-life leaders are telling the mainstream media that they want to get rid of the pro-life movement and do their own thing. And that is destructive and counterproductive. So my kind of advice to anyone who's new to the pro-life movement is just, it's always been, when someone new comes onto the scene, you have to give them a good 5 or 10 years before you really know. And I know that sounds crazy, but you really do have to give people 5 or 10 years to see what their fruit is. Is this person going to end up being a divisive figure? Are they seeking spotlight? Or do they actually have a new idea that hasn't been tried and is something that we really have been lacking and want to get behind and bears good fruit? I mean, just don't be too quick to see that someone is different and therefore they must be better, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And I do think that we have to be careful about our tactics, but I think that part of the problem is that a lot of people want a black or white answer to a lot of things. Like, for example, the graphic images. Mm-hmm. There are people that it's like they just want a yes or a no.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's not that simple. There are places where those images are useful and necessary. Waving them at a woman as she's walking into an abortion facility is probably not the wisest time to use them.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't use them ever.
Right. Yeah, people do want the yes or no answer in the pro-life movement. And so much of the pro-life movement is nuanced. And I think that's partly because our movement touches so many pieces of society. Our movement touches the woman walking into the abortion clinic. And then another part of our movement touches kids on college campuses. And those are two different demographics that need two different approaches. And that's the graphic images is a really good example of the fact that nuance is required in the pro-life movement. And that does require a lot of an investment of time and energy in figuring out how things work and where things stand, and learning like the psychology behind women seeking abortion and things like that. So getting into the pro-life movement is a little bit of an investment, I guess you could say. And you have to have the humility to just step back and observe things until they make sense.
And I think that's where some of the people, it becomes, I mean, just from my own observations for some people, it becomes more about them than it does about the movement. Like I remember seeing a video, there were actually a couple of cases and they were linked together somehow, I don't remember how. But one of them was that this group of pro-lifers descended on the home of an abortionist and they did what they called a chalk and awe campaign. And they chalked messages.
I didn't hear about this.
Huh?
I didn't hear about this.
Yeah, 2 years ago. And they were chalking messages like all over the sidewalk in the street at this person's house, like their personal home in the neighborhood. And they were, this was like 4 years ago, I think. And they were writing things like abortion is murder, your neighbor is a monster, and, abortionist's name kills babies. And the neighbors, let alone how the abortionists felt, the neighbors were furious. And where they filed police reports and wanted vandalism charges filed against the pro-lifers.
Right.
And there was another situation where this late-term abortionist was supposed to be at a court ruling from a judge where it was ruled that his clinic had to close, which is great.
Right.
Forced closing of a late-term abortion facility. Good news.
Yes.
For whatever reason, the abortionist himself did not go. The spouse, the wife of this abortionist, went instead. And these two men from groups that shall remain nameless, like, right up in her face. I'm talking there, like right next to her with like Bibles sitting there, you know, like loudly telling her, you know, close this clinic now, and, you know, and your husband is a murderer, and turn your life to Jesus. And I mean, like following her into the elevator, you know, and then like outside, and the entire time there's just like this steady stream of stuff they're yelling at her.
Yeah.
And again, they're like right up in her space. And I'm watching this video going, I feel physically uncomfortable and I'm not even there.
Right.
If that had been me, I would have been scared. I
Right.
would have literally been scared. And the point of those examples is, you know, confronting people that are implicit in the abortion industry can be a good thing. But going and committing vandalism at someone's home and upsetting their neighbors does not do any good for the pro-life movement. Going and scaring the wife of an abortionist does not do good for the pro-life movement, because what do you think the difference is there? Like, you've just confirmed all of their negative opinions about the pro-life movement. You've just, any chance that there might have been of them saying, no, I want to repent, I don't like what's going on, I want to work for life. Oh, well, here are these crazy people yelling at me.
Yeah.
They're not going to come to you for help. It's like when you're sitting there screaming at a woman when she's walking to an abortion facility that she's a baby killer and that she's a monster and she shouldn't do that.
Right.
Why would she come to you? Why would she go to you for help? She's going to go inside that abortion facility and they are going to be so sweet to her. They're going to tell her that, you know, she's doing the right thing and they're there to help her. And meanwhile, outside there's people screaming at her. Who is she going to go to for help? Like, we have to be smart about what we do.
Yeah. I mean, a couple of things there. First of all, those crazy people are outliers, and they really are a minority, but they're very loud, and they definitely tend to make the media, and they do create a really bad negative image for pro-lifers that doesn't reflect who we really are. So that's really frustrating. The second thing is that's not what we as Christians, even evangelicals, you know, have a different tradition than Catholics, but that's not what any of us are called to when we're called to have, for example, righteous anger, which we should have toward abortionists. That's not the reaction that's called for. Neither does that mean that you need to go up and hug the abortionist's wife. But I can't imagine any motive for shouting, for doing these really hostile things to abortion workers and whatnot. I can't imagine that there's any motive that's not self-righteous. That's not God's just anger. That's a self-righteous anger where I think people are getting a rise out of feeling like they're better than somebody else. I mean, this is like when there's outrage over that family in California that like chained their children to their beds, you know, for like years and starved them. Every parent can feel good about themselves now because they're not like that, you know, but that's not the type of anger that we should be showing toward abortionists. We should be showing, we should be at least extending the opportunity to them to come around, and you're basically robbing them of that opportunity when you're pushing them away in that manner. So that's obviously not right, and it's not what we stand for, but it's really frustrating when people do things like that and then it gets caught on video and just affirms all the stereotypes that the media tries to pass off as reality about the pro-life movement.
Yeah, we have to be able to show people love and compassion and kindness. But you also made a good point when we were talking earlier that by the same token, we shouldn't be screaming at people. Right. We also can't be going around and, you know, hey, Cecile Richards from Planned Parenthood, let's sit down and have a coffee. Let's be best friends.
Right.
That's not loving either.
No, and I think the theme for this year's March for Life was so on point because it was love saves lives. And it was really an opportunity to, for me at least, to ponder, what does that mean? I mean, what does that mean when we say love saves lives? Because, and this is partly a problem with the English language. And, you know, like I majored in classics and stuff, so I love thinking about words. But in the English language, love means a lot of things. Like you can love potato chips and you can love your children, but obviously they're very different emotions and decisions associated with that love. So having the opportunity to think about what does love save lives mean in the context of the abortion industry and ending abortion. And there, I think we do have to strike that balance between like self-righteous indignation and being so soft that we're ineffective. And I think what we can kind of go back to that adage that love is a decision and love is willing the good of the other. So we can always ask ourselves in relation to abortion, how do I will the good of the other in this case? In the case of a preborn child, you rescue the preborn child. In the case of the mother, you extend the compassion that's missing from her life that's driving her to abortion in the first place. In the case of an abortionist, it's you speak truth to them in a way that leaves the door open for them to convert and repent. And in all three of those cases, there's a level of self-sacrifice that's required from us. So I think it might be a good kind of like test of our love to ask, what am I getting out of this? If I'm getting some kind of like satisfaction out of this, it's probably not love. If I'm having to sacrifice something, whether it's my time or my pride, then that's probably a good indication that that's the love that we need to show. But I just loved that theme, love saves lives, for this year's March for Life, because just with everything that's going on in the pro-life movement, even with the division and the fracturing that's happening between groups, like this was a really good opportunity to step back and kind of ask ourselves, what does it mean to love in every situation?
Yeah, it's not loving to, I mean, like you mentioned the example of an abortionist, it's not loving to not tell them the truth.
Yes, exactly.
But you just have to do so in a way that's not hateful either.
Right, exactly.
That's not confusing, but yeah.
I mean, yeah, and I'm a big proponent of tough love and telling it like it is with the abortion industry. Like, I mean, I would be a hypocrite to sit here and say that I'm nice to them, because you could go over to my Twitter page and like, I buy Felicia, Cecile Richards, yesterday on Twitter. Like, I definitely think that it's okay to call things like they are. What's not okay is to personally attack them. So I'm not going to go and call her some demeaning name, but I can judge her actions. I can discriminate against what she's done. I can point out that she oversaw the death of 3.5 million children at Planned Parenthood while she was at the helm. None of that is unloving. It would become unloving if I started to do it for my own like entertainment, or I wasn't praying for her at the same time. You know what I mean? And I'm always trying to find that balance, and I've probably failed at it before, but the truth with the abortion industry is really important. Telling the truth, not just for the public to know about them, but because these people in the abortion industry are surrounded, they're in an echo chamber. They're surrounded, Cecile Richards is surrounded by NARAL, the Feminist Majority Foundation, Emily's List, President Obama. She's surrounded by people that are patting her on the back and calling her a hero. And she needs to know that the truth about what she's doing, and the only place that she's going to hear that is from the pro-life movement.
And what's interesting to me about Cecile Richards is that, I mean, Planned Parenthood and abortions, it's not a new thing. But before she came on board, Planned Parenthood, they saw their future in prenatal care, which is really interesting, and in healthcare. They wanted to get away from abortion. And then Cecile Richards comes along, and every healthcare service that they offered has plummeted, if not been outright done away with. And you can look at this. This isn't stuff, again, people always accuse the pro-life movement of like making this stuff up, and it's like, no, it's in their annual reports. You can go on Planned Parenthood's website and see this for yourself.
Yeah.
This isn't something we're lying about.
No, but Cecile Richards tries to lie about it because when she was under congressional investigation, someone showed her a chart of how all their services have gone down and all their abortions have gone up. And she was like, well, I can't confirm any of that because it's from AUL, but AUL had based the chart on Planned Parenthood's annual report. So she plays.
Right. But it's like, well, so what is going on in Cecile Richards' mind that she takes the helm and suddenly, well, no, we don't want to get away from prenatal care. We don't want to do more of that. We don't want to do more healthcare. We just want to do more and more. Like, why did she decide that? I'm really curious about that.
I have a couple of theories. One is obviously abortion is Planned Parenthood's most expensive service. So if you look at Planned Parenthood's 990s, which a lot of people don't look at, they look at the annual report. But if you look at their 990 IRS forms, you can see how Cecile Richards' salary has gone up in conjunction with her push for more abortions at Planned Parenthood. So Cecile Richards was making a couple $100,000 a year when she came on to Planned Parenthood like 11 years ago. Their last 990 is from it's for the year of 2014. So it came out in 2015 and it covers the year of 2014. So they're like behind with their 990s. But even then, her salary had gone up to almost $1 million, I believe. It was like $800,000 or $900,000. So her salary has made exponential leaps. And because Planned Parenthood is run like a corporation and not a nonprofit, even though they call themselves a nonprofit, I'm sure there was pressure from the board for them to drive up whatever the revenue, whatever service was bringing in revenue. And so you see this dip in preventive services and treatment services, and this just skyrocketing, over 20% abortion skyrocket since Cecile Richards came on. And I think we also have to factor in that Cecile Richards did have an abortion. So you always have to wonder, is there some sort of effort to justify her own actions in promoting and popularizing abortion at Planned Parenthood?
Yeah, and Elise Hogue, who was the former leader of NARAL, same thing. She also has been very outspoken about the fact that she's had an abortion.
Yeah. Yes, and the funny thing is that Elise Hogue and Cecile Richards and Don Legans, the vice president of Planned Parenthood, they were all on Twitter last week congratulating Senator Duckworth because she's pregnant. And she's going to give birth. She's going to be like the first senator to give birth while in the Senate, which is, I guess, as far as I know, there's been several in Congress, but I guess this is the first senator. But it was so bizarre because they were saying things like, this is such wonderful news. And if only more women in Congress, in elected officials could get pregnant, we wouldn't have to fight for abortion. And I'm like, are you hearing yourself right now?
Well, it's like, I mean, it frustrates me because it's like if you took 2 seconds, you could answer your own question. I did an interview with Sarah Bosser, who was, I can't remember if she's still currently the president or if she was the president. I think she still is the president of Feminists for Life. And, she made these points, and it's very true, is that there are all of these reasons that women need abortion. All of these issues. There's not support on campus, whether it's high school or college, for pregnant or parenting students.
Right.
Many of these students are put in these situations where to continue with school, it's not impossible, but it is extremely difficult. Working as a single mother is incredibly difficult. We don't have a culture where you can bring your child with you to work, or, that it's affordable to send your child to daycare, so on and so forth. And then men, a lot of times, especially if it's not someone, if you're in a relationship with, it can be difficult to, have support. And for a man who doesn't want a baby, who doesn't want to have to pay child support, well, here's abortion.
Exactly.
It's like Susan B. Anthony said, of course the woman is guilty. And I'm paraphrasing. This isn't the exact quote.
Yeah, I love that quote.
Yeah, that, of course the woman is guilty, but thrice guilty is the man who led her to it.
Yes.
And so Saren's point and mine is that abortion doesn't solve any of these problems. It perpetuates them. Yes. It allows them to continue so that injustices continue, so that women continue to have no point or no help and no support. And why should they? Why should things change when she can just go have an abortion?
Exactly.
And so when Cecile Richards and Elise Hogue are sitting there talking about, well, why aren't there more women giving birth in the Senate? Boo-hoo. And it's like, well, because of the system that you set up.
Exactly.
Because if a woman is in this situation where she's in a crisis pregnancy, there's not help for her. And why would there be when she can just go have an abortion?
Exactly. Ding, 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 ding. Yep. Yeah. It's almost comical, if it weren't so evil, how much cognitive dissonance is involved in marketing abortion, because they claim to be pro-woman, and yet abortion is the most anti-woman act. And then the geniuses in the PR department at Planned Parenthood thought that the hashtag Men for Choice campaign was a great idea, which totally backfired, by the way, because men got on the bandwagon or were like, yeah, we love abortion. We can go, trying to think of a tame way of saying this, we can do whatever we want with no consequences, which is great for men. And I'll just plug Brian Fisher, my boss at Human Coalition, has a book called Abortion, the Ultimate Exploitation of Women. It's a book that's written for men to kind of wake up and see what the abortion culture has done to women and call them to something higher. So highly recommend that if anybody is interested. But yeah.
It was funny a few years ago, this pro-choice movement, like that you mentioned, came around, and these stupid men, it kind of killed it because they opened their stupid mouths and were basically, there was one op-ed, I think it got deleted not long after, but he literally said, we need to keep abortion legal because it's good for your sex life. And his point was, hey, if abortion's not legal and you knock a girl up, and hey, birth control is only so accurate, so it's a possibility. If she doesn't have an abortion, then, now you've got a kid and you're not going to be able to sleep around anymore. And it's like, yeah, thank you for framing why abortion is bad for women. Because this isn't just about babies. Like, I know they like to say that, but this isn't just about babies. This is the exploitation of women.
Yes.
So that men can have consequence-free sex.
Exactly.
Because so the woman doesn't have to raise a baby, carry a baby, well, that's great. But she's still the one that has to go through with the abortion, has to pay for it, has to put her physical health at risk, her mental health. The man can just skip along on his merry way and, no consequences, no problems, no anything. Well, it's women, and he just gets to have a good time. And this is feminist.
Yes. And let's be honest, and this is where the Catholic Church is such a good influence in the pro-life movement. The onus of childbirth being on women starts long before she's pregnant. In the contraceptive culture, the woman is the one who has to make sure that the pregnancy doesn't happen in the first place. So naturally, when that fails, then the onus is on her to get rid of the problem. But the root of the problem goes back to how we're viewing sex and birth control in the first place. And it's so funny to me that people haven't come to, well, some people have, but that a lot of people haven't come to the conclusion that the Catholic Church was right all along, that sex should be monogamous between people that have committed to each other, because that's the only way that you don't end up with abortion being on the table at any point.
And I actually think that's a good segue into one thing that you mentioned, because the church's view, as you said, people are coming around to see how correct it was on these issues of abortion and birth control, except for Catholics for Choice. Who's pretty much the worst organization ever.
Yes. They have ramped up their social media presence. At least I have been noticing that they have. So Catholics for Choice is this organization that's been around for a long time. And they are diabolical. And I don't say that lightly. I don't just go around calling organizations diabolical. This organization explicitly exists to subvert the truth of the Catholic faith. And of the Catholic faith, we could also define that as just the truth. So Catholics for Choice's premise is that abortion is not only okay, but is a social good based on the philosophy, that's not Catholic, by the way, that institutions don't have a conscience. Therefore, the Catholic Church doesn't have the authority to state what is and is not a moral act, really to acknowledge the universal truth and the 10 commandments of natural law. Instead, only individual people have consciences, and everyone's conscience is subjective. Therefore, if a woman believes in her conscience that abortion is the right choice for her, and Catholics for Choice says that there are cases where abortion is good. So if a woman thinks that abortion is a good choice for her, it would be wrong to question the conclusion that her conscience came to. Now, for anyone who's not familiar with Catholic teaching, the Catholic Church says that there are fundamental universal truths that do not change. The Catholic Church simply acknowledges what those are. They're kind of summarized by the 10 Commandments. And it's kind of the Catholic Church's job to ensure that individuals form their consciences properly, that is, in line with those universal principles. So not only is Catholics for Choice wrong on abortion, Catholics for Choice is wrong on fundamental truth and the way that truth works, the fact that truth exists. It's weird to me, not weird, but diabolical that they exist and that they insist on calling themselves Catholic, because really what they're trying to do is not just justify abortion in certain cases. They're trying to undermine the fact that truth is a thing. And that undercuts the entire foundation on which the Catholic Church exists. And the sad thing is, this isn't like a group of a couple of radicals. This is a well-funded, I suspect by somebody like George Soros. This is a well-funded group that seems to have a team of people. At least they've got a strong social media presence. And they do things like interview well-credentialed and well-spoken professors from places like Marquette University, which is ostensibly a Catholic school. So a lot of problems coming from Catholics for Choice. But if you come across them on social media, just be aware that that is the angle that they're coming from. And for some reason, they are pretty evangelical in their approach. Like, they do go out and try to convince Catholics that their position is correct. It's not just kind of like a group for people to stumble across and join if they agree, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and they've attacked United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. Mm-hmm. They've called abortion a Catholic value. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're not just talking that they support abortion. They say that it's a Catholic value. Like, getting an abortion is a Catholic thing to do.
It's a social justice cause of the Catholic Church.
Yeah. They take out ads defending Planned Parenthood. They even had one, this was a few years ago, where they had an ad campaign asking for people to send love letters to Planned Parenthood for Valentine's Day. They get grants from Planned Parenthood, like, from it just, yeah. I mean, and they do this all in the name, ostensibly, of the Catholic Church. It's not, but that's what they tell people, and it gives the abortion industry this ammo to use, because it's like, oh, well, here's Catholics for Choice.
Right.
And it's infuriating and sickening and exasperating, because on the one hand, I sit there and think, well, if this is what you believe, then just, go be Episcopalian. They're down with abortion, and, like, why?
Right.
Why, if you disagree with everything that, the church stands for, do you want to remain Catholic? I don't understand it. But it's about, like you said, subverting the church. Yeah. They can't do that if they're not Catholic.
Yeah, I almost feel that abortion is just the token issue that Catholics for Choice decided to adopt in order to undermine the Catholic Church. I really think that for them, it's about redefining truth, pushing relativism, and justifying abortion, but I think abortion is almost secondary to what their main objectives are. It's disgusting and infuriating, and we all know that Planned Parenthood definitely puts pastors and church religious leaders to work promoting their agenda. It's one thing, though, when it's a Unitarian Universalist or some kind of like lapsed evangelical, but it's another thing when people claiming to be Catholic are getting involved in that. So very frustrating. It
started out of Margaret Sanger's playbook. And it's not familiar with Margaret Sanger. She was the founder of Planned Parenthood. She was a eugenicist who thought, that the unfit should not be allowed to breed, and the unfit being people with disabilities or mental illnesses or Black people or people that were poor. And her whole tactic was to find Black religious leaders or other religious leaders, just in general, that would be on board with her worldview to back her up. And so I get why Planned Parenthood does it, but I just want to take these people and shake them and see, can't you see that you're being used?
Yeah.
You're being exploited.
Yeah.
You're being exploited for your religious beliefs, your so-called religious beliefs anyways. So, wake up. Like,
yeah, and exploited so that these people can make money. Like, that's what this boils down to. Not exploited for any like higher cause, but exploited so that this group can kill people and make money off of it.
And for what? Really, that's another thing that I just don't understand. Like, what do they have to gain by this? Like the pro-choicers. I get it. Okay, so you get your sex life, like, right. Whatever. For women who have abortions, most of the time it's because they're scared or pressured. So, but what is your motivation here? Like, what do you gain from this? Planned Parenthood gains something. What do you gain?
Yeah. Mystery.
What are they gaining by doing this?
They must just get a rise out of being subversive, honestly. I think there's people that thrive off of derailing people.
Well, and I know that it's like, we know the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. Like, it's just like we know that the church will stand. Like, this isn't going to destroy the church. But really, things like this happen, and you sit there and you think, like, this is, I'm not one to run around and say it's the devil, but this kind of feels like it's the devil.
Yes. Yes. Amen, sister. It is. And I don't know. This is just, I haven't been thinking about Catholics for Choice for very long. So I'm still kind of like digesting, like, what's the right response? Is it it's probably to talk about them in an apologetic manner, like point out these are their lies and this is how we respond to them. But in terms of engaging them versus ignoring them when we encounter them, I'm not sure. To be continued.
Yeah, it's exactly like you can sit there and you can think of the motivations for these various groups. And if you can understand why someone is doing something, you know how to respond. But there's just, how do you combat pure evil?
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you do?
And this is the most diabolical thing possible. Because it's one thing for the church, the satanic church, to come out and say they love abortion. It's like, yeah, no duh, like, obviously. It's a completely other thing for a group to say we're Catholics and we think that abortion is a Catholic value. And to be campaigning vociferously for that, that's diabolical in a worse way than the church, somebody like the Church of Satan doing that.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Yeah. Oh, hey, that's a good seg for the novena that you have been posting about, because prayer is really the antidote to a lot of the stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah, the USCCB, that we just mentioned that Catholics for Choice likes to attack. They're doing a 9 Days for Life novena right now. I've been posting it on our Twitter, on our Facebook page every day, and it's day 8 right now. But you can go and probably get caught up if you wanted to. And each day it's got a reflection and an act of reparation that you can do based on whatever that day's specific reflection is, what we're supposed to reflect on. And so one of the things that I've liked about it is that, of course, there is a lot of talk of abortion, but it's multifaceted when it comes to pro-life goals. Because yes, one day is pray for an end to abortion, but then another day is pray for healing for post-abortive women, for example. Or pray for women who are struggling with infertility. Pray that people with disabilities are seen, to have the inherent dignity and value that we know they have. Pray for an end to the death penalty, so on and so forth. So it really encompasses the fullness of the pro-life movement.
Yeah. I love that. And I was personally really disappointed in the way that my parish did Sanctity of Life Sunday. But really, there's activism and action that we need to do to kind of bring our churches up to speed, but prayer is really where it all starts. And so I'm really glad that you've been posting that novena, and I need to get caught up on it. But if you're interested in getting your church more involved, there are a couple of resources. Human Coalition, the organization I mentioned I work for, humancoalition.org, we have a church outreach whole division. And so that there's a team of people that work specifically with churches to help educate not only the pastors, but also the congregation. So we'll provide educational materials for if you want to have a Sunday school class about abortion. We'll work one-on-one with a pastor who wants to learn more so he can give a sermon on abortion. And this is for any denomination of Christian. We will work with you. And then Priest for Life has a site called prolife.church, which has resources that you can just pass along to your pastor. So to kind of bring him up to speed if he's not keeping in touch with the pro-life movement. It was kind of demoralizing at our Sanctity of Life Sunday. The abortion was sort of mentioned in the prayers of the faithful. And then there was an announcement at the end about, what was it? I can't remember, but then there was a sign up sheet for 40 Days for Life outside in the narthex. And that was the extent. And we're not a parish that talks about abortion outside of Sanctity of Life Sunday. So my hopes had been kind of built up for that. And it was really disappointing to see, because not just, yes, because women within the Catholic Church are exactly as likely to have an abortion as anyone outside of the church. So, all the preborn children at a Catholic Mass are as at high risk of being aborted as any other child outside the church. And there's just as many post-abortive women in the church. And it really bothers me when a Catholic Church doesn't recognize that and say, we're the one place that a woman is probably going to get post-abortive healing or have the hope to not go through with an abortion, and then they fail to do that. It's very disconcerting. So I just kind of encourage people to continue praying for an end to abortion and praying for our churches, but also try to take advantage of some of those resources and take an active role in stepping up your church's game if you happen to be at a church like mine.
Yes, for sure. Definitely.
Yep. Anything else that you want to add? I know there's so many things to talk about in pro-life right now. We should probably do this monthly or something.
Yeah. I don't want to say part of the problem, because it's not a problem. It's that like you mentioned at the beginning of the video, we both work in the pro-life industry. Lauren, like she said, works for Human Coalition. I work for Live Action. So this is what we do.
Mm-hmm. Those are 9 to 5, man.
About it, then I would be a little bit concerned.
Yes. Right. Yeah. It's kind of a shame we haven't talked about it up till now, but we love talking about it. And we don't really have to prepare for these shows because this is what we live, eat, and breathe. I wake up and check pro-life Twitter every morning, and then it's go till I go to sleep. And I know Cassie's the same way. So we
have alerts.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. I'll also mention, I started a local grassroots group in my community. And if anyone is interested in doing that, mine is called Kingwood Pro-Life Women. I live in a suburb called Kingwood, and we are a nonpartisan a group that's not affiliated with a pro-life organization or a church. And we just address the culture of life in our neighborhood. And so if anyone is interested in doing something super hyper local like that, I would be happy to give you the blueprint and let you copy everything that we've done and just put your your name on it, because I think that that's an important piece of ending abortion in America, is getting on down to the nitty gritty. I mean, I live in Houston, where in my suburb, Hurricane Harvey hit my suburb really, really hard. And there were a lot of women who were low income, and they lost all their baby clothes. They lost formula, diapers, anything that they had kind of been nesting in preparation for the birth of their child. And a lot of them had other young children, which is common. And I started to get messages like, hi, are you the girl that helps pregnant women? You know, and it just became, my house became like a pregnancy center. Like all these women in my group were dropping off car seats and diapers and clothes. And then I was moving them to my garage. And then I would get a message from a mom that would say, I need this size clothes, formula, and diapers. And I would go out and put together a kit and then meet her at Starbucks. And that whole 2 weeks of Harvey was just this like replenishing the stock for local women. And I mean, in your community, you might have a totally different set of needs, but having that hyper local support and having women just know there's some girl in my neighborhood that helps pregnant moms, it can make a huge difference. So if you're interested in that, I would be happy to show you the kind of the steps that we follow.
Yeah, it sounds really great.
Yeah. I guess that's it.
Yeah, good for today.
I really like your lipstick color, by the way. What is it called?
Thank you. Yeah, this is Too Faced Melted Matte in Candy Cane. I've mentioned Gingerbread Man, which is like the cult favorite. Gingerbread Man was the 2017 limited edition. This is the 2016 limited edition.
Oh, okay.
For like the holiday season. I know it's called Candy Cane, but it's like pinkish. It's not red. I mean, obviously you can see it. But so I don't really know why they named it that. It does smell like Gingerbread Man smells. It has like great like peppermint mocha-y kind of scent, so it smells really nice. But I like the color because I feel like it's not as seasonal. You know, like I think I can wear this through the spring and summer. Not fall, summer maybe. But
well, you're a lot more like season savvy than I am. I'm like, oh, this color looks good on me, and I don't even think about like what season it is.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's like what you should. But you know, like Gingerbread Man is so like I don't know. It's not like there's a rule or anything, but it's just I already feel like I don't know, spring's coming, so not to. I feel a little strange wearing my super dark lipsticks, you know, because it just. I don't know. I'm just starting to feel like I want things to be brighter, and I don't know. But it's Too Faced Melted Matte. I really like it because I mean, you've seen me drinking like the Diet Coke this whole time because, you know, I need my caffeine to survive. And like it's still here. It's not budged. It does not go anywhere. It dries really quickly. So, yeah, I'm a big fan.
Awesome. Yes, I need to buy some of those Too Faced lipsticks. I have my chapstick. That's my thing that I typically stick with. But anyway, everybody, thank you for joining us today. If you have any suggestions or questions, like we said, we eat, live, and breathe this stuff, so we would be happy to engage with you in the comments. And we'd be really grateful if you would share our video with your friends. And so with that, I will sign off, and we will see you guys next week. Take care.